What you're about to hear isn't just another storm survival story. It's about a man who lost everything, faced death in the darkest waters, and when he cried out to the Virgin Mary, something happened that defied all logic. What he said after surviving changed an entire community forever. This is where faith meets the impossible. Before we continue, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I really want to see how far these powerful stories are reaching. The salt-stained nets hung heavy in Miguel Santos' weathered hands as dawn broke over the small fishing village of Cascais. For 37 years, these waters have been his life, his livelihood, and sometimes his tormentor. The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly before him, deceptively calm on this September morning. But Miguel knew better than to trust its peaceful facade. His grandfather had taught him that the sea was like a beautiful woman with secrets, captivating on the surface but capable of devastating fury without warning. Miguel's boat, the Santa Isabel, creaked gently against the dock, its blue and white paint peeling from years of faithful service. Named after his late mother, Isabel, who had died when he was just 12, the boat was more than wood and nails to Miguel. It was his last connection to a woman whose faith had been as deep as the ocean itself. The morning had started like countless others. Miguel checked the weather reports, which showed nothing more than light winds and clear skies. His crew consisted of just 2 men, Joao, his nephew who was barely 22 and eager to prove himself, and old Carlos, who had fished these waters for 50 years and claimed he could smell a storm coming 3 days away. Carlos had seemed uneasy that morning, muttering something about the birds flying inland, but Miguel had bills to pay and a daughter, Ana, whose wedding was just 2 months away. He needed this catch. Ana had begged him not to go out that day. She'd had a dream, she said, of dark waters and her mother's voice calling from somewhere far away. Her mother, Teresa, had died 3 years ago from cancer, and since then, Anna's dreams had taken on an almost prophetic quality that unsettled Miguel. But dreams didn't pay for wedding dresses or church ceremonies. As they pushed off from the dock, Miguel noticed his daughter standing at the pier's edge, her hand clutched around the small silver medallion of the Virgin Mary that had belonged to Teresa. She wanted him to take it, but Miguel had refused. His faith had died with his wife, buried alongside her in the cemetery overlooking the sea. God, the Virgin Mary, all the saints his mother had prayed to, where had they been when Teresa writhed in pain, when the cancer ate her from the inside out, when she begged for just 1 more year to see their daughter married? No, Miguel had told Ana, keep your medallion. The sea was his god now, cruel but honest in its indifference. They were 17 miles offshore when Carlos first noticed change. The temperature dropped suddenly, as if winter had arrived in the span of minutes. The seabirds that had been following their boat, hoping for discarded fish, vanished. The horizon, which had been cleared just moments before, now showed a wall of black clouds advancing with impossible speed. Joao laughed nervously, making jokes about Carlos's weather predictions finally coming true, but the old man's face had gone pale. This wasn't just a storm, Carlos said, crossing himself. This was something else entirely. Miguel had seen storms before, violent squalls that could flip a boat in seconds, waves that rose like moving mountains. But what approached them now defied comprehension. The cloud wall seemed alive, rotating and pulsing with internal lightning that never touched the water. The first wave hit them at 2:47 p.m. Miguel would remember the exact time because the boat's clock, an old brass piece that had belonged to his grandfather, stopped at that precise moment and never worked again. The wave wasn't just water. It was a liquid mountain, 40 feet of roaring foam and fury that lifted the Santa Isabel like a toy. Joao screamed. Carlos prayed in rapid Portuguese, and Miguel fought the wheel with every ounce of strength his decades at sea had given him. But strength meant nothing here. The second wave came from the side, spinning them violently. Equipment flew through the air like missiles. The radio exploded in a shower of sparks. Joao was thrown against the cabin wall with such force that Miguel heard the sickening crack of breaking ribs. In that moment of chaos, as the third wave prepared to deliver what would surely be the killing blow, Miguel found himself thinking not of survival tactics or emergency procedures, but of his mother's face. Isabel Santos had been a woman of unshakable faith, who attended Mass every morning until the day she died. who kept a rosary under her pillow and taught her young son that the Virgin Mary was the mother of all who suffered. Even as cancer ravaged her body, she had smiled and told Miguel that Our Lady of the Sea would always watch over him. He had forgotten those words, buried them with his mother, and later, deeper still, with his wife. But now, as death approached in the form of a wave that blocked out the entire sky, those words returned with crystal clarity. The wave descended, and Miguel did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He cried out, not to the sea, not to the wind, but to the Virgin Mary his mother had loved so deeply. Santa Maria Maida Deus. The words tore from his throat in Portuguese, the language of his childhood prayers. If you're real, if you ever heard my mother's prayers, hear mine now. Not for me, but for Anna. Let her not lose her father before her wedding. Please, Holy Mother, I have nothing left to give but this plea. The wave struck, and the world became water. The Santa Isabel didn't just capsize. It was torn apart. Miguel felt himself pulled under, down into darkness, so complete it seemed solid. His lungs burned. His chest felt crushed. Joao and Carlos were gone, swept away in an instant. But then, in that drowning darkness, Miguel saw something impossible. A light, soft and blue like morning sky, emanating from below rather than above. As his consciousness faded, as his body began to accept death, he felt arms around him, not the cold embrace of the ocean, but warm, impossibly warm arms lifting him up. He heard a voice, or thought he did, speaking words in a language he didn't understand but somehow comprehended perfectly. Your mother's prayers were never forgotten. Your wife's faith never wavered. They have been waiting for you to remember. Miguel wanted to respond, to ask if he was dead, if this was the afterlife his mother had believed in so fervently. But instead, he found himself breathing, not water, but air, sweet, salt-tinged air. He was on a piece of the Santa Isabel's hull, barely large enough to support his body. The storm still raged around him, but it was as if he existed in a bubble of calm. The waves that should have swept him off his makeshift raft parted around him. The wind that should have frozen him to death felt warm. For 6 hours, Miguel floated in his impossible sanctuary, and during those hours, he experienced something that would haunt and heal him for the rest of his life. He saw his mother, young and healthy, standing on the water as if it were solid ground. She didn't speak, just smiled and pointed to the horizon. He saw Teresa, his wife, her face free from the pain that had marked her final months. She blew him a kiss and mouthed words he couldn't hear but understood. Tell Anna I'm proud. When the Coast Guard found him at dawn, 17 miles from where the Santa Isabel had gone down, they called it impossible. No one could survive 6 hours in those waters, in that storm, on a piece of wood barely 3 feet wide. The water temperature alone should have killed him in under an hour. They found no trace of Joao or Carlos, no debris field where there should have been one. Just Miguel, completely unharmed, clutching something in his right hand so tightly they had to pry his fingers open at the hospital. It was a silver medallion of the Virgin Mary, identical to the one Anna wore, identical to the one his mother had been buried with. But this one was warm to the touch and remained warm no matter how long it sat in the cold hospital room. Anna was there when he woke up, tears streaming down her face, her own medallion pressed to her lips as she prayed. Miguel reached for her hand and spoke the words that would soon spread through their entire village and beyond. I saw them, he said, his voice hoarse but certain. Your mother and grandmother. They're not gone, Anna. They're waiting, watching, protecting. The Virgin Mary, she's real. More real than the storm, more real than the sea. Your mother wanted me to tell you she's proud. So proud of the woman you become. Anna collapsed against his chest, sobbing, and Miguel held his daughter as he hadn't since she was small, since before grief had built walls around his heart. But what Miguel said next was what truly changed everything. There were others, he whispered, in the water, in that place between death and life. I saw other souls, lost fishermen, calling out, but not being heard because no one was listening for them. The Virgin told me I was saved not just for Anna, but to be a voice of those still lost. She said every person who dies at sea leaves someone on shore praying for their return, and those prayers create a bridge that can still be crossed if someone just believes enough to look for it. The hospital room fell silent. The doctor, who had come to check Miguel's vitals, stood frozen in the doorway. Anna pulled back to look at her father's face, searching for signs of delirium or shock. But Miguel's eyes were clear, clearer than they had been in years. Over the following weeks, as news of Miguel's survival spread, something extraordinary began to happen. Families who had lost loved ones at sea started coming to him. They brought photographs, mementos, desperate hopes that maybe, somehow, their prayers could still reach those they had lost. Miguel couldn't explain what happened next, couldn't rationalize it even to himself. But when he held these items, when he closed his eyes and prayed to the Virgin Mary, he could sense things. Not see exactly, but know. He knew that Francisco Ferreira's son, lost in a storm 5 years ago, had thought of his newborn daughter in his final moments, and that his love for her still existed somewhere beyond the physical world. He knew that old widow Henrique's husband had died trying to save another fisherman, and that his sacrifice had been witnessed and honored in ways she would understand when her own time came. The church, initially skeptical, sent Father Antonio to investigate. The priest, a young man trained in Rome and naturally inclined toward theological caution, spent 3 days with Miguel. What he reported back stunned the diocese. Miguel knew things he couldn't possibly know. Details about people's lives, about their lost loved ones, specific prayers that had been whispered in private moments of grief. More mysteriously, the medallion Miguel had been holding when rescue defied all explanation. Metal analysis showed it was silver, but silver of a purity that didn't exist in modern manufacturing. It contained traces of salt, but salt crystallized in patterns that maritime scientists said were impossible, as if the ocean itself had been transformed into a preservation medium. 3 months later, on Anna's wedding day, the small church of Cascais overflowed with people. Fishermen who hadn't attended Mass in decades stood in the back. Widows who had given up on faith sat in pews they had abandoned. Miguel walked his daughter down the aisle, and when the priest asked who gave this woman to be married, Miguel responded with words no one expected. "Her mother and I do," he said clearly. "Teresa is here, has always been here, waiting for us to remember that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form." Some thought it was sentiment, but Anna felt it. A warmth beside her, a familiar perfume that shouldn't exist, the sensation of a hand touching her veil. The photographer would later discover that in one image, just one, there appeared to be a figure in white standing beside Anna, translucent but undeniably present, smiling with Teresa's smile. Miguel never returned to fishing. Instead, he became something the village had never seen before, a bridge between the living and the lost. He didn't claim to be a medium or a mystic. He simply prayed, holding the medallion that never lost its warmth, and shared what came to him. The diocese never officially recognized what happened to Miguel as a miracle, but they didn't deny it either. Father Antonio wrote in his report that some manifestations of faith exist outside the boundaries of canonical verification, that sometimes God works through broken vessels to show that nothing, not even death, is beyond the reach of divine mercy. The most remarkable change, however, was in the fishing fleet itself. Before heading out to sea, boats began stopping at the statue of Our Lady of the Navigators that overlooked the harbor. Hardened sailors who had mocked religion their entire lives could be seen leaving flowers, lighting candles, whispering prayers not just for safe return, but for those who hadn't returned. The sea had always been dangerous, would always be dangerous, but now it was also something else, a place where the boundary between heaven and earth seemed thinner, where prayers might actually breach the divide between the living and the dead. Joel's body was never recovered, but his mother, who had initially been destroyed by grief, found peace after speaking with Miguel. He told her that Joel had thought of her in his final moments, that his last word had been May, and that somewhere beyond the physical realm, her son knew he was loved and mourned. She couldn't explain why she believed Miguel, but she did. The warmth from his medallion, when he let her hold it, felt exactly like Joel's hugs had felt when he was a little boy. Carlos's widow experienced something similar. Miguel told her that Carlos had died as he had lived, with a prayer on his lips and peace in his heart, knowing that 50 years of honest work and simple faith had prepared him for whatever came next. A year after the storm, marine biologists studying the area where the Santa Isabel went down made a discovery that defied scientific explanation. The seafloor, which should have shown signs of the wreckage, instead contained a perfectly circular area where the sand had crystallized into glass, not melted by heat, but transformed at a molecular level into something that resembled glass, but remained at ocean temperature. In the center of this circle, they found a single piece of wood from the Santa Isabel's hull, the piece Miguel had floated on. It hadn't decayed at all despite a year underwater. When they brought it to the surface, it was warm to the touch, just like Miguel's medallion. If you were touched by Miguel's story and want to witness more incredible testimonies of faith and survival, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. These stories will strengthen your faith and show you that miracles still happen every single day.